morning. Am I live? I don't see.
No camera.
No camera. Well, maybe you can hear me. Good morning. Welcome to today's genealogy program. Today is July 8th, 2023, and the topic today is overcoming pitfalls. I'm Jessica Ashton with the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center. And we're here, of course, with Terri Meeks, who puts the lovely presentations together. So a couple quick things to start out. We did have some website issues yesterday. So if anyone ran into those, I apologize for that. Hopefully, if you're here in attendance today, we got that figured out. But just know that if you know of anyone who maybe wasn't able to get registered, that these will be on our YouTube channel, so they can watch it there. Also, I wanted to say a warm welcome to everybody. We see a lot of familiar faces on the list, and as always, we really appreciate your attendance. We also see a lot of people we haven't met before, so if you don't mind, take a moment, introduce yourself quick in the chat, just who you are, where you're from, and maybe how you heard about us. We're really excited you're here. And without any further ado, I think I will pass this on to Terri. We are talking about overcoming pitfalls this morning, which I would imagine if you're attending a genealogy class, you're already aware that there are many pitfalls on this journey you can encounter. So, all right, Terri, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome everyone. And yes, just like this picture shows, there are bumps in the road, actually holes, and there are weeds to get stuck in along the side of the road. But hopefully I like to view pitfalls as perhaps more like the sand traps along a golf course. We get enthusiastic and excited when we discover a potential new record, and we tend to abandon common sense and good basic genealogy principles and best practices. And we tend to jump in and adopt that record without doing further diligence. So without further ado, let's jump in. One of the first problems with pitfalls is actually recognizing that you have a problem. Whether you've been doing genealogy for a long time, whether you've inherited someone else's work, or whether you are just getting started yourself, all of these cases can present some overwhelming instances. And we're going to take a look at those and see if we can come up with some solutions. Here's just a brief list of some of the major pitfalls that we can fall into. One of the biggest things that I hear from so many people is, I'm drowning in paper, and how do I organize it? It depends when you have started your genealogy journey. Did you start 10 years ago or more and did a lot of paper research? Or are you a new genealogist so that many of the records that you have found and much of the work that you have done is online? So both cases do present problems as far as organization is concerned. And we'll take a look at some of those solutions. Downloading family trees from the internet. Have you run into conflicting documentation, and how do you resolve those conflicts if possible? We've all seen some images that demonstrate poor record quality, whether they're fuzzy images, incomplete images, or just plain missing images. And in a side note, as far as missing, I heard a recent genealogist in a program state that only about 20% of genealogy-related records are online. So just because you don't find something online doesn't mean there isn't something to be found. One of the biggest questions that we face is when we do encounter a record, is it truly our family, especially those of us that have common names? And in a small discussion that I had yesterday, we came to the conclusion that virtually no name is unique. There are duplicates of all of our names. And finally, I have succumbed to this myself, losing some of the data. We don't want to do that. So, let's talk about too much paper. When we tend to first get started, whether an experienced genealogist or a new genealogist, we do tend to use some paper, and we make family group sheets. That's usually how we get started. And we try to do an ancestral chart. We start with ourselves, we put our parents' names in and perhaps our grandparents and try to work backwards. Well, as we go along in our search, we collect documentation, whether it's on paper or whether digitally. Many of us have family photos that we have either inherited or that we have taken ourselves. And how do we organize those and share those with other family members? Correspondence is another thing. We tend to rely on email, so you might keep an email file, or in some cases, we have had to write actual letters. In some cases, those letters go unanswered, or the answer comes back with a negative response. This is all valuable information because you don't want to revisit those sources in the future or multiple times. And it is a good practice to keep a research log, just so that you know where you have looked, what you have found, and importantly, what you have not found. So the solution to this, whether paper or digital, is organization. And one of the things I suggest is a numbering system. It can be a numbering system that is unique to you. It can be something as simple as labeling yourself as number 1, your father is number 2, your mother is number 3, and going backwards. And we'll see an example of that. Or it can be something more elaborate because you may be a sibling, your parents might have had siblings, so you need to differentiate those people. Choose something that will make sense to you. File folders, here again, paper or digitally, or notebooks for the paper products that you do have. How to organize those. It's very good to start with that numbering system with yourself and put things in that file folder or notebook. I tend to organize things chronologically. So if I have a copy of my own birth certificate, that comes first. Any appearance in any census would come. High school graduation programs. Don't overlook yourself. You probably have a lot of paperwork in your own home that refers to you. And think of your children, grandchildren, or future generations. That information needs to be preserved and shared. So you want to keep that either in some kind of a file folder or a notebook, or digitize it to share online. There are also ways to organize things on your computer or using a tablet or even phone apps. What you want to do is have a copy of a genealogy application or a genealogy computer program on your own computer. While Ancestry, Family Search, MyHeritage, many of these genealogy sites allow you to enter family trees. It is always good to have your own copy. I had a woman, and it has been several years ago now, that did have a family tree on Ancestry, and it got lost. I will admit she is the one and only person that I have heard that that has happened to. So it probably is a rare instance, but it can happen. Computers change, and computer file formats change, whereas paper, it can be destroyed, it can burn, it can get wet, but paper is the more lasting of the media. And you can organize on your computer or on your tablet as well. And we'll look at some of these methods. Here is an example of a numbering system. This happens to be for my husband's family. He's number 1, his father's number 2, mother number 3, and so forth. This helps you very readily, because everyone in the male line is going to be an even number. Everyone in the female line is going to be an odd number. The other thing is that a parent is going to be twice what the original person is. So Daniel comes number 1, his father comes number 2. Twice that is 4. That's his grandfather. 3 times that is 12. Excuse me. 2 times the 4 would be 8. And that's his great-grandfather. 8, 16, 32. And the same holds true for the women. 3, 6, 12, 18. So this is a good way to organize, set up a filing system, whether online, whether in your on your computer or through file folders. If you have paper and set up folders or notebooks, start with yourself. Just like any genealogy practice, you want to start with yourself and work backwards. Maintain that reverse chronological order. And you may divide your notebook into your father's family or your mother's family, and continue to add people going backwards. If you fill a notebook, you might want to then move to 2 notebooks, one for your paternal side, one for your maternal side. And before you know it, you may need 4 or more. I know a couple of people who have also used color coding to distinguish their paternal lines versus their maternal lines. Choose a color and choose something that has a broad spectrum of colors so that you can choose shades of that color to delineate other family members. I recommended a couple of minutes ago computer applications, and here are 3. The first 2 are for non-Mac users. The third one is for Mac users. Both Legacy and Roots Magic do have free versions. They are not as complete as the paid versions, but they will do everything that you need it to do on a basic level. Here is what a particular screen for legacy looks like, we do see that we have the husband, the wife, the opportunity for parents, children. Most of the programs do have similar displays. There are quite a number of buttons across the top that allow you to create charts, manage your data, add photos, and add documentary sources to your program. Likewise, Roots Magic has the same ability. The person, the parents, the children, and you can see a listing of everybody that is in your database. And there are options along the side for additional capabilities within the program. Takes a little bit of research to use these, and most of these programs do have help available, either through a web chat or through online question sources. Excuse me. Here's the reunion, and as we see, it's a similar layout with the people, the parents, children, and a listing of all potential names. We can't overlook Ancestry and Family Search, as well as WikiTree, MyHeritage. And I do encourage people to upload your information. This is one of the best ways to share the information. Having your own program is a safeguard and a backup for anything, for the data that you have collected. But online trees allow you to share and open up a whole world of potential communication with other family members. Ancestry does allow you to, just with a simple account without a payment, they do allow you to enter a simple family tree. You can attach records. With the subscription, you can link to DNA results, and you can add photographs of people. And there are many, many features that you can use in both Ancestry and Family Search. WikiTree is another program that people use to some extent. It does require documentation. They want you to cite your documentation, not just add a name without any documentation. We'll take a look at those. Here's a family tree example from Ancestry, and we see the person's name, a very similar layout to the computer programs where we see parents, a spouse, and any children. We also see a timeline, and this is valuable so you can identify large gaps and look for the documentation that can fill those gaps. We also see potential sources listed. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do, because I have seen errors in this, look at each one of those sources. Names are common. They are not unique. Even if your name is Mahitable, there's someone else with that name. So look at the sources that people have attached, because in some cases, they may be incorrect. Here is kind of the same information from Family Search, and this is just the top part of the first page within a family tree. And we notice that there are 3 sources for information, and we have the bottom part of the page where we see a couple, child, parents, and siblings, and who has entered the information and other ways to communicate, add, and identify possible duplication. Both WikiTree and Family Search, their goal is to try and create a single family tree. They want you to connect with all of the people that are related to you and not have duplication. So they want my tree to connect to someone else's tree so that we avoid the multiple duplication of the same name. Here is an example from WikiTree, and we see the same thing. We see a George Johnson, where he was born, he's the son of, who his siblings are, and who his spouse is. And we have the links to the other members of the family. You can also upload images to WikiTree for the documentation. In many cases, documentation is an actual citation with a web address or a book reference. Thinking about computers, tablets, how do you organize your information on one of those? You can choose, there are any number of ways. You can choose to organize things by the family name. I personally keep a whole separate file just for the census, because each one of the census years and each one of the census pages has multiple family members, and you don't want to duplicate that in the family name file. Then you're going to run into multiple hundreds of copies. So if you're using census as documentation, make sure you refer to it appropriately, but keep it filed in a separate file. If you have other documents, for example, from state records, if your people were from Colorado or Maine, and you have a lot of records for any of those states, their births, their marriages, their deaths, where they appeared in city directories, you might want to have a file just for the Colorado residents, the Maine residents, etc. And where do you put newspaper articles, photos, find a grave files? You can file them with the people, or you can have separate files, whatever makes sense to you. Here's an example from my family. My grandmother was a Cooney, so I have listed some of the family members, and I have separate directories for the Cooney siblings and the Cooney relatives. It represents multiple generations. And then within those files, I collect the unique data. If one of your family members, for example, Ellen Cooney, if she had quite a number of children, I might have additional files for each one of them and file the information in their particular folder. I mentioned that I keep a separate census file. So here is a listing of the censuses that I have. And within those, I have collected each one of the census images for the families. I make sure that I identify the husband, the wife with her maiden name, as well as, of course, the married name at the end. If someone is a widow or widower, I usually also note whether and put in parentheses, Abraham, widow of Ida. So we've beaten that organization into hopefully some form of submission. Now let's think about those online family trees that are so wonderful and that give us so many clues. We all know the rule: never import directly into your own family tree. It behooves you to investigate all of the names in a family tree and determine, are they indeed your people? You don't want to chase the wrong branch of the family, and you certainly don't want to do someone else's genealogical research. When evaluating family trees, you want to make sure that documentation is provided. What kind of documentation? And is that data valid for your particular family? Are people living in the right place at the right time period? And are the other family members the ones that you recognize from your own research? Does the data make sense? And we'll look at some examples of things. From Ancestry, we get a reference to a family tree, and we see the information, which does seem to be logical and consistent. The dates form consistent patterns, and we see that there are 9 records for this particular file. Oops, excuse me. So we'll take a look at it. This is the same screen we've seen earlier, where we do see the chronological data and we do see the sources. We do note that there is one file that's an Ancestry family tree, which means that that's someone else's data. If that has indeed been it's a reference, but if it has been incorporated into this file, there may be some errors. We do see movement around. We do see a marriage for New York and a death in Georgia. So that raises a question: is it indeed a valid record? And it takes the research to make sure that indeed that is a proper record. We also see people with this same names, but much further back. And we look at those, and here again, dates seem to be in reasonable order. We see a file that has no records attached. These dates might be good clues. We see a birth in 1761, but without any specific information. So it's an about date. Is there a real record that points to an actual birth date, a church record, for example, or even a tombstone record? So more research needs to be done, but these are good clues for a starting point. We do see another one that has consistent dates and has 11 records attached to it. So we think, oh, we've got a bonus here. But when we actually look at the record, we're seeing it's all family trees from other sources. There aren't any true and valid records. The Quebec, Canada notarial records are a possibility. Those are actual records. And in many cases, with Ancestry, it's not the full record, it's just the index. So that too requires further research. In Family Search, we have the same opportunity. We see the top part of the page. We see that there are 26 sources in this particular file. So we want to look at those. And yes, at the top, we see all census data. This is really wonderful information. Here again, make sure you look at each one of those censuses. We'll notice that the first one has the name spelled incorrectly, but it still might be a valid record. And indeed it is. We see different contributors who have added this information, and Family Search does allow you to contact these people if you find something that you need further clarification on. You also run into cases where there is some clearly incorrect data. We have Mr. Pelletier, born in 1663 in Sillery, and he's married in 1840. Well, he's an exceptional human being in that case. I had thought originally that this might be a typo, but I can't come up with a number that would be a meaningful number in this particular situation. The other thing is that the record for his birth and his death are in Quebec, and this residence record seems to indicate Paris. So that too is a questionable. He died when he was 35 years old. It's not impossible that he returned to France, but highly unlikely. So much further digging needs to go in as to when he got married. This happens to be an example from my own family. This is my great-grandfather, Thomas Tremblay, who died on the 30th of August in 1892, and his wife, who died the year previously. If I look in the actual church record for his burial, I see that he died and was buried on the 3rd of November, not August, in 1892. And it identifies his wife in the record, so that part is correct. But we also see that he has been dead for 6 days. So chances are he died in October. The church record is probably the more valid of the two, because tombstones, in many cases, especially since his name is on the top, it indicates to me that the tombstone was erected after the death, significantly after the death of both Thomas and Zoe. So take those kinds of things into consideration. When is the tombstone, or when is the engraving on the tombstone being made? And is there any other information that you can find? This predates death certificates. So we're not going to find one of those, but is there funeral parlor information that might help us to determine the validity of the dates? Here is another case, and when we work backwards, sometimes we tend to find a death before we find the other information, but we find a death for Adelard LeBlanc. And it says that the inscription on the tombstone is for Adelard with his dates and his wife, Laura Burke. So you go looking by entering the names into Ancestry or Family Search to try and see if you can work backwards. And you're looking for Adelard and Laura. Well, here's their marriage certificate from the state of Massachusetts. And we see that Adelard is married to Dora, not Laura. And we see their approximate ages, which match with the tombstone. And we see their parents' names and a pretty complete record for their marriage. And going back even further, we find Laura's birth, and she's really Marie Edith Dora Burke. So there are potentials for handwriting, misinterpreting the handwriting, and we can see where Dora and Laura might be confused. But it's hard to find these records when actually looking on a name search for Laura. Here is a record that takes some in-depth research. On the surface, it is a marriage certificate from the state of Virginia for this young couple. And all of the information is filled in. So you go, what is the incomplete information here? And we see parents' names, we see birth ages, we see the actual marriage date and where they were married, who they married, and we get a certificate number. But let me go back a second. We notice that her occupation is that of a secretary, which is great in the early 1950s. But we see in her find a grave notation, there's an article that's published more than a year after she has passed away. She died in 2006. And in 2007, there's this newspaper article that talks about her being the first patrol woman in her community. That's a significant role and something to be extremely proud of. So make sure you get the complete story. She was a patrol woman up until her marriage. So the marriage record records her as a secretary, but indeed, she had a valuable, both of the occupations are valuable, but look a little deeper sometimes. We have all encountered poor record quality in some way, shape, or form, whether it's fuzzy, illegible, handwriting, missing information, scanning errors. One of the most recent things is the OCR scanning. The 1950 census came out last year and they used OCR scanning. And if you have gone looking for your people in that 1950 census very early on, you might have had a great deal of difficulty finding your family because the names were incorrectly interpreted. So in those cases, you want to either use browse functions or look for other sources for the information. Here is an example of a fuzzy copy. The left side of the page in particular is illegible. It's almost impossible to read, but it looks a little different, but it is the same information. The first image was from Ancestry. The second is from Family Search. The Ancestry one image you can use and find by entering a name. The Family Search image, you have to actually use the browse function to find the record. So sometimes persistence pays off. Here's another case where the record is virtually too faded. It's for a marriage, and the marriage information appears at the bottom of the page. But as you can see, it's impossible to make out. This is one of those cases where there probably is not another record online that gives this information. So that's where it's important to read the information on Ancestry in their card catalog or in Family Search in their card catalog to find out where the original image came from. Get on the phone to call and see if you can get a copy of the original image, or an extracted record might be able to help you to fill in the information that's missing. And speaking of missing pages, here is a church register, and we notice that it is from pages 1 to pages 1282, but it starts with a baptism record that's numbered 3. Who were baptized? Who were number 1 and number 2 baptized in that parish? Here again, this happens to be through Family Search, roll of microfilm that has to be browsed, but we do have the record for numbers 1 and numbers 2. This is not Pick on Ancestry Day. I apologize, but there are errors in all of these programs. This one happens to be a scanning error where only part of the page was actually scanned. And here is the corresponding information through this one's Family Search and the roll of microfilm. In some cases, especially with death records, we find incorrect or a lot of missing data. This one happens to show that he was born on the 11th of January in 1976. But there is an actual baptism record, and his actual birth is recorded as being the 11th of June in 1970. You can understand with the JUN and the JAN, and a 6 and a 0 might be interpreted incorrectly. This is an extracted record, so chances are that the original record, the handwriting, was a little bit messy or illegible. Don't overlook information. One of the pitfalls that we sometimes fail to recognize is looking on preceding and following pages. We get excited when we find the name that we are looking for and the family group that we are looking for. But there might be more information. There might be more children. There might be in-laws. There might be neighbors and other relatives that are living on the preceding or following pages. And because we tend to use most of these programs by entering names and dates, we want to be aware that there are some records that just record male and female. So if you're entering the name Elizabeth, it's not going to come up in any of your data. So take a look and don't overlook male and female, especially if you cannot find a birth record or a death record. Looking at this particular page in the census, we notice at the top of the page that we've got children, but we don't have the parents. They are probably going to be on the preceding page. At the bottom of the page, we have a family group with 2 children. Because this is my family, I happen to know that there are supposed to be 2 more children. And yes, they are on the following page. I have actually in my own family found examples where some of the younger siblings are not recorded on the following page, but perhaps 2 or 3 pages later, and they are unattached to their family, and there is a marginal note that indicates that they belong to the family on 2 or 3 preceding pages. So if you've got some missing people, just keep looking in that enumeration district for those names. When the World War II draft registration files got added, this was a valuable resource because in many cases it does give birth information, especially for birth dates that precede the required registration of births. So this was a valuable set of information. And I personally collected a lot of these files. Without looking at the second page, which gives an actual physical description of the young men. And if they had any marked significant injuries or scars, those are also noted in this. In looking at this information, I realized, not on this particular one, but I noticed that there were quite a number of young men, this is World War II, who were 5'8", 6 feet tall, and they only weighed like 140 pounds. So people were much, much thinner than they are today. Here is an immigration record, and it's just a petition for naturalization. This is the first page of data. In some cases, this first page may be the only information that you find if the person completed their citizenship in a different area, in a different court, in a different state. you might just find this one page, but don't neglect to turn the page and see if you have the complete file with the witness affidavits as well as the oath of allegiance, and when citizenship was actually conferred upon the person or rejected. Here is one of those cases where we have female. Here again, it's in alphabetical order with the listing. But if you're looking for Jane or Mary, you're not going to find her unless you check the male, and in this particular case, or the female or the male for one of the ones that you have missed. Extracted records. You always want to look for the original, but in many cases, extracted records can be extremely valuable. And I've noticed that there are some immigrant ship records that, for example, from the emigration ports of Bremen or Hamburg, and most of us are not familiar with the German language, so that the extracted record is very, very helpful in that. Here is an extraction for an 1840 census, and it records the tabular data very easily, very understandably, and it allows you to see very readily how many children under the age of 5, how many people, how many males, 20 to 29 years old, and the total number of people in the family. It also gives the actual location of the community, which, oops, on the exact image, I don't know how to get rid of that there, which on the exact image is a little bit more difficult to determine. Reading all these headers to determine. This particular one does give the location. However, I've seen many where that information is cut off or not filled in. By the same token, the extracted record for a passenger list, it gives you the port of departure, when the arrival date, where they arrived, the ship name and the line of the ship. Whereas the actual image just gives you the name of the person and their data. It doesn't give the dates or the actual ship name. So extracted information can be valuable as well. How do you assure that something is part of your family? Does it make sense? Can you trace them back? You want to look backwards, then look forwards to make sure that they indeed are your family members. Do the siblings match and other family members, spouses, etc.? I came upon this tombstone for a Martin Cooney in Troy, New York. About the only thing he appears in absolutely no census. The only thing I did know was that he apparently was in the military. So I thought this is a good possibility. But then here's another military headstone. The first one had a death in 1900. This one has a death in 1904. in very, very different places. It's got a middle initial. The first one didn't have a middle initial. Which one is one of these my guys? So I took a look at all the information that I did have surrounding Martin Cooney, not in any census. He had a sister, Catherine, who married a James Cleary. And we see in the letters of administration that her brother Morris and her brother Martin are identified and listed along with a niece and nephew. This is in 1893. So it might be incorrect to assume at this point that he's still alive, but one could hope that he's still alive. We also find a death record in 1904 for the youngest brother in the family. And we see in this information that because he died without a will, they are trying to contact all the possible people that have a claim on the estate. And we see 3 children of Martin Cooney deceased. So we've been kind of able to delineate the time frame between 1893 and 1904. I did discover that Martin had 2 sons that also served in the military. Both of them were stationed in the Philippines in 1900. One in the band and the other in the infantry. And I know that these are my people because they listed an address in their home, and this is where their cousin, Mary Moore, was living. We see from their enlistment records, and I'm just showing one for each case, but there are multiple enlistment records which show that Martin was born in Fort Sanders, Wyoming, where his brother was born 2 years later in Fort Lebanon, Kentucky. I also see from newspaper articles that these 2 sons are at a camp for sons of veterans. Martin was a soldier. So we know he was in the military. The quest became what unit was stationed in 1870 at Fort Sanders, Wyoming, and in 1872 at Fort Lebanon, Kentucky. And this was an exhaustive search, but I did discover that it was 2 companies, Company B and Company I of the 4th Infantry. And from the tombstone, I see Company I of the 4th Regiment of the U.S., and I don't know what RV is. So my theory is that, yes, indeed, this is my Martin Cooney. I can write to, I want to say Carlisle Barracks in Pennsylvania to see if I can't come up with what that USRV is. From the 1904 re-enlistment records, I see Martin H. Cooney, and it turns out that he is the one that has died in 1904, multiple carcinoma. So this is indeed his son. Losing your data. You don't ever want to do that. Back up, back up, back up. If you have it on a computer, use external drives, thumb drives, the cloud to back up. This is one reason that Ancestry and having your information on your personal computer, Ancestry, and in Family Search will be helpful. Those backups are automatically there. And one of the other things is, in terms of your data, is to document where you found things. We so frequently are so excited that we find something, but we fail to document exactly where we found it. What page was it on? Because if you have to go looking for it again, you want to be able to find it. Before we get into the conclusion, one of the last things I want to tell you is something that we haven't talked about here. You have potentially spent many, many years collecting this information. Do you have a provision for who is going to receive it? This might be one of your biggest pitfalls. Where is that information going to go when you are no longer here? Having it online is a wonderful thing. Computers, computer programs, computer languages, databases change and don't always get updated. So make sure that you have provisions, especially for the paper that you have. Even putting it in a local history center, a repository, somewhere where your people lived, so that it does exist for future generations. So, in conclusions, some of the pitfalls are spelling, just simple spelling. Are your people going by their middle names? Are they going by nicknames? Or, in many of the records, they're just initials. Are you looking for them or overlooking them? Make sure you research the entire family. Those collateral lines can also provide valuable information. And identify your sources, especially when you found nothing that tells you something. And save copies of those records that you find, whether on paper or whether digitally. Attach them to your family trees and your online trees. Look for those originals. While indexes and abstracts are wonderful, the original might have additional information than the abstract includes. Read the record entirely, and if necessary, record the key information in those records. It's important, as we've seen, to evaluate the records to make sure that they are indeed your family members, and correlate this information with other records. One source that I said, or that I've heard as far as a genealogical standard, is when coming up with some of these factual information tidbits, we need to document them in at least 2, possibly 3 cases. And that will help you resolve any conflicting information. Sometimes it may also create the conflict. Know the history and geography of the area that your people lived in, and especially at the particular time frame that they lived in. avoid assumptions. Don't just assume that the family moved from one place to another. They might have migrated from Iowa and moved further west, but make sure that you find the proof that goes along with that. Consider the possibilities. I know someone that had her people moving from Delaware out to Washington State, and then in the following census, they moved back to Delaware. And you're thinking, did they really? Take time to review your records periodically. It's sometimes you will see things differently, or you will see things that you had overlooked previously. With the 1950 census, it gave us the opportunity to relook at family relationships and relook at things and see, okay, did this lodger become a member of the family, and move forward from there. And don't hesitate to look for help. You know, are there other family members that can help you that perhaps might have been at a certain occasion, seen a certain thing, witnessed something? Librarians and docents at various libraries, history centers, archives, they are there to help you. And as we've seen this morning, join a genealogy group or participate in a webinar and see if you can learn and pick up other things. And by all means, try to provide some help for someone else. Try to see if you can help them. A new set of eyes may reveal something that they have not seen. So with that, at this point, I'll turn it over to any questions. And if we don't have time to get to your question, you can send an email and we'll see if we can get an answer to you.
Thank you, Terry. We do have one question today. And by the way, I monitor the chat session during the webinar. So if you do have any questions or comments, just use the chat box and we'll respond to that. So Leslie asked the question. She says, I got on late today. So was there any handouts? And unfortunately, we don't provide handouts, but each of these webinars are videotaped and saved on YouTube. And if you want to look at the previous webinars, you go to YouTube, then type in Royal Gorge Regional Museum, and it'll come up to their website within YouTube. And then right now it's you can find these past webinars underneath the title Museum Programs and Presentations. Well, I just talked to the museum's IT, and he's actually going to reorganize the YouTube site so that it'll have a dedicated genealogy webinar section so that we can quickly go into all the webinars for genealogy versus the blend of genealogy and other topics. So sure enough, go on to YouTube and the regional Royal Gorge Regional Museum site. And you can, if you missed anything today, like you tuned in late, you'll be able to see the entire webinar. It will take a couple of days for that to be up on the website, but then all the previous webinars and I'll tell you what, they are fantastic. So much information. I think everybody agrees with that you can review those webinars based on different topics.
I guess I would like people to take an extra minute or two and ask them, have they fallen into any pits or come across any unusual circumstances that might not have been covered this morning that they too could enter into the chat and perhaps get a response at a later date? So if there are no further questions, we'll talk we'll announce our follow-on genealogy program, Off to the Who's Gal. In many cases, some of us have ancestors that might have been on the wrong side of the law at a particular point in time. These are people that actually have some really, really interesting stories. However, I have heard recently that there was a man who stopped doing genealogy when he discovered that one of his relatives had been a horse thief. Those are the ones that add color. There is nothing new under the sun. There have been black sheep in the family. There have been ne'er-do-wells for centuries. So there's no really cause for embarrassment. But we're going to take a look at the records that are available for jails and prisons. We're not going to be looking at the actual court cases, but actually the prison and jail records. And jails have been around since day one. So if there are no further questions, I thank you for joining us this morning.
All right. Well, thank you, Terry. As always, that was just fantastic. To Dan's point, all of these are fantastic on our YouTube channel. And so Dan just explained, you can go to YouTube, search Royal Gorge Regional Museum. Kind of an alternate way to get there would be go to directly to the museum's website, museum.canyoncity.org. And that can be kind of a one-stop shop for you because you can look at our calendar, check out our upcoming events, and then just click on the little YouTube icon from there and it'll take you right over. So yeah, it just made me think, Terry, looking at the next program coming up, this is a pitfall that people run into. They get excited about doing genealogy and then maybe uncover something that they wished they didn't know about their family, or maybe something scandalous or some of the darker sides of that. And I think that's kind of the risk we do when we start digging around. But as you said, that's not something to be overly worried about. Just a couple of quick announcements here. Upcoming events, we have this Wednesday, we're doing a historic bike tour at Lakeside Cemetery here in Canyon City. That is a registration required, and I know that it's getting pretty full. So if you wanted to register for that, if you go onto the website and find that that it is full, just reach out to me. I'm Jessica at the museum, and we'll figure out a way to get you on there. And then also on July 26th, that's also a Wednesday, is our community coffee. And if you haven't ever been to these, or if you have, they're really fun events. And so we invite everybody to come down. We supply coffee and donuts, and each month has a discussion topic, and we record as an oral history interview. And this month's topic is going to be storms. So any memorable storms, inclement weather, that sort of thing that you either want to share about or hear about, come on down. So that'll be on July 26th, 9 a.m. the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center at 612 Royal Gorge Boulevard. Thank you, everyone.